When the ocean turns violent, even the calmest moments can collapse in seconds. From a great white tearing apart a family's yacht off Gansby to a Coast Guard officer losing control during a routine drill, these events escalate fast. In this video, we'll explore 6 shark encounters that reveal how swiftly nature can overpower experience, preparation, and instinct. December 4th, 2025 began with calm skies and a soft morning haze drifting over the waters off Gansby, where the open stretch between the mainland and Dyer Island carried its usual mix of slow-moving swells, scattered seabirds, and the distant movement of seal colonies sprawled across the rocks. Nothing in the early hours hinted at the speed and brutality with which the day would unravel for the Sterling family as they guided their glossy $2 million yacht toward the feeding grounds that had long made this coastline one of the world's most dangerous places for shark encounters. David Sterling, a 38-year-old tech consultant who spent most of his life inland, had planned the trip months earlier as a rare window of family time, hoping that Claire, 36, who loved photography, and Ethan, 12, who had grown obsessed with marine wildlife documentaries, would experience the thrill of seeing the massive seal population that crowded the rocky edges of Dyer Island each summer. He believed the yacht's modern stability systems would keep them safe, even as they drifted near one of the most predator-dense stretches of ocean in South Africa. A few hundred meters away, guide Thomas Myers stood on the deck of a commercial charter vessel, monitoring the slow churn of water and the early seal activity, while explaining seasonal patterns to his guests. Although he had spent years watching the behavior of great whites in this region, he felt a brief pang of unease when he noticed that the seals were agitated in short, frantic bursts, diving sharply and scattering in quick funnels of movement as though something heavy and fast was pushing under them. The wind picked up just enough to ripple the surface. In that shifting light, he saw the faint but unmistakable bloom of shadow beneath the Sterling yacht, a dark mass moving with deliberate momentum. He felt an instinctive chill as the shape grew clearer, revealing the enormous outline of a great white that had to be close to 19 feet long, its bulk far larger than he typically saw in early summer. The shark rose in a slow, gliding ascent, its shadow expanding as it approached the hull, and before anyone could understand what was happening, the predator twisted sharply and drove upward with explosive force, smashing into the yacht's starboard side with a violent impact that echoed across the water and sent a spray of shattered fiberglass into the air as the hull buckled under the strike. The vessel lurched so suddenly that all 3 Sterlings were thrown off balance. With the second surge of the shark's momentum, the yacht rolled hard, sending them tumbling over the rail and into the cold, churning surf, where the sudden shift from stability to chaos stunned them long enough to leave them helpless in the roiling water. Thomas shouted to his passengers to stay back as he grabbed a pole and moved toward the bow, but the movement of the shark was too fast and too powerful for any human intervention to matter. David resurfaced first, disoriented and gasping, only to be pulled downward by a violent surge beneath his feet as the shark struck from below, its jaws clamping around his lower body with such force that the water around him burst into a cloud of foam and turbulence. He vanished beneath the surface in a single horrifying drag that left Claire screaming as she tried to stay afloat in the heaving water. She kicked toward Ethan, who flailed several meters away. Still, the shark wheeled with predatory precision, rising again in a long, sweeping arc that cut directly between them, its dorsal fin slicing through the surface before it pivoted and drove straight toward her with another surge of speed. She tried to push herself away from the trajectory, her legs thrashing in panic. Still, the predator's massive head broke the surface beside her as its jaws snapped with brutal force, striking her side and spinning her toward the current while she struggled to remain above water for even a second longer. Ethan fought to keep his head above the swells as the shock swallowed his breath, and he drifted backward in a desperate attempt to move out of the shark's path. But the great white had already locked onto him with unmistakable predatory focus. It circled once, its body rolling just beneath the surface, and then it surged upward in a clean, devastating strike, seizing him in the same swift motion that had taken his father moments earlier. Thomas slammed the pole against the water in a frantic attempt to drive the shark back, but the distance was too great, and the predator's force was too overwhelming. All he could do was watch helplessly as Ethan was pulled beneath the waves in a swirl of white water and silence. In less than 20 seconds, the sea, which had erupted with motion and color, returned to a chilling calm, broken only by the overturned decking of the Sterling yacht, fragments of shattered railing, and scattered personal items, including a floating camera strap and a bright orange life vest that never had time to be used, drifting aimlessly across the rippling surface. The commercial charter moved in as close as safety allowed, its engines humming beneath the tense quiet that followed the attack, and Thomas scanned the water with the strained intensity of someone unwilling to accept what he had seen. Yet the ocean remained still except for the slow drift of debris and the faint red plumes that dissolved in the moving tide. Rescue crews arrived minutes later, launching inflatable boats and diving teams into the area. Still, nothing remained except the overturned vessel and the scattered remnants of a family trip that had begun with excitement and ended with a level of violence none of the witnesses would ever forget. The Great White sank back into the depths without leaving a trace, and the water closed over the scene as though trying to erase the brutality that had unfolded there on the morning of December 4th, 2025, leaving only shock, silence, and the haunting memory of how quickly the sea could turn from calm to catastrophic. September 2nd, 2021 unfolded with bright tropical light glinting across the restless waters off the coast of Mauritius, where warm winds swept in steady gusts from the open Indian Ocean and sent long ribbons of swell rolling toward the lagoon. And nothing in the early rhythm of the morning hinted at how abruptly the surface calm would fracture, as adventure athlete Hugo Bernard prepared for yet another high-risk stunt that blended speed, height, and the unpredictable nature of the sea. Hugo, 25, had dedicated most of his young adult life to pushing the limits of kiteboarding, carrying scars from previous accidents, and an obsessive drive to capture the perfect high-arc jump on camera. This stretch of coastline, with its deep blue channels and fast, steady winds, had become one of his favorite arenas for the kind of aerial maneuvers that demanded precision and absolute trust in both technique and instinct. He launched from the shallows with strong practice strokes, letting the kite lift as the lines tightened and the board skimmed forward across the choppy surface. He felt the familiar surge of speed as the wind locked into the canopy and pushed him toward the deeper water, where the camera crew on a small support boat waited to film the attempt. In late winter, the tropical currents around Mauritius often gathered dense schools of baitfish and swirling silver clouds that shifted unpredictably with each swell. On this morning, the shimmering mass drifted just below the surface in a restless, darting cluster that drew the attention of several reef-dwelling predators, including a 6-foot blacktip shark that cruised slowly near the drop-off at the edge of the lagoon. Unaware of the concentrated activity beneath him, Hugo focused only on timing the next gust, using the fast pulse of wind to angle upward for a jump he hoped would carry him into a long, smooth arc above the turbulent water. As he carved into position, the board sliced cleanly through a patch of foam, sending bright sprays off both rails, and the splashes rippled downward into the baitfish school in a way that instantly disrupted the frantic movement below. The blacktip, already agitated by the sudden scattering of prey, reacted with the kind of swift, opportunistic drive that defined its feeding patterns, surging upward through the disoriented fish in a straight, forceful burst. At that moment, Hugo launched himself into the air, pulling hard on the control bar to send the kite climbing sharply. Still, the takeoff was slightly mistimed by an unexpected wobble in the chop, and as he ascended, the tail of the board dragged across the surface with a quick, noisy slash that amplified the disturbance below. The shark accelerated in a narrow plume of bubbles, rising with the fast, direct motion typical of blacktips that seize on sudden movement, and it intercepted Hugo at the exact moment when the underside of his jump left him briefly suspended between lift and gravity. The shark's snout brushed the board, and its open mouth grazed the lower part of Hugo's right calf, its teeth slicing through muscle in a shallow but violent drag that shocked him with immediate pain and sent him spinning off balance. He crashed back into the water with enough force to knock the wind out of his chest, and the impact caused his kite to dip sharply, dragging the lines in a messy arc that allowed one wingtip to catch the water, twisting the canopy and pulling him sideways through the chop in a disorienting sequence of jerks and splashes. Stunned and unable to regain stability, Hugo thrashed instinctively as he tried to right himself, and that uncontrolled motion created even more disturbance in the water, sending pulses of vibration through the baitfish cluster and briefly catching the attention of the blacktip again. The shark, still in a state of heightened reaction from the disrupted school, circled in a wide loop with sharp, fast strokes of its tail, returning toward the noise created by Hugo's struggling limbs and the flapping kite canopy that dipped in and out of the surf. It moved with quick, sharp turns, coming close enough that its dorsal fin sliced above the surface in a dark, brief stroke, before it angled down again and snapped once near the drifting board, its jaws closing on empty water as the shifting currents pushed the equipment out of reach. The support crew, which included Hugo's longtime friend and safety manager Mark Duval, reacted as soon as they saw the board jerk strangely and the jump collapse mid-air, and they accelerated the boat toward the impact zone, weaving through the chop as they scanned for signs of Hugo beneath the erratic motion of his tangled kite. They reached him just as he managed to lift his head above the surface with a strained, half-coherent gasp, and Mark leaned over the bow to grab the harness strap on his vest, pulling him toward the deck while another crew member cut the lines to free him from the twisting kite that threatened to drag him back under. Once aboard, Hugo's injured leg immediately told the story of the near miss with deep punctures on the outer calf, torn muscle tissue, and extensive bruising already forming around the edges of the wound. The blacktip had retreated by then, slipping back into deeper water as the chaotic vibrations faded and the baitfish regrouped into a tighter school, leaving the scene as quietly as it had entered. The crew stabilized Hugo on the deck while heading full speed toward the nearest harbor, applying pressure to the wound and keeping him alert as the adrenaline wore off and the pain deepened into sharp, pulsing waves up his leg. Medical staff later confirmed that the injury, while serious, had narrowly avoided severing major arteries, and they noted that the combination of fast movement, splashing patterns, and baitfish agitation created the ideal conditions for a blacktip's instinctive reaction. In the weeks that followed, experts emphasized how easily extreme sports in tropical waters could turn dangerous, even when small predators responded to bursts of motion and feeding cues. Hugo's near-fatal encounter on September 2, 2021, became a stark reminder that no level of skill or preparation could ever fully control the unpredictable instincts of the ocean's hunters. August 11, 2019 broke with humid air and lingering bands of wind rolling off the Atlantic, the remnants of a storm that had swept across Florida's eastern coastline overnight, churning the surf and scattering debris along miles of quiet, undeveloped beach where the morning sun rose behind unsettled waves and shifting tides. And nothing in that early light suggested the danger hidden in the shallows, where the storm had driven in a powerful predator. Melissa Harper, 29, arrived on the remote stretch in search of solitude after a stressful week, drawn by the promise of a near-empty shoreline where she hoped to walk alone, clear her head, and enjoy the muted calm that followed a night of thunder and rain. She moved along the damp sand with an almost meditative pace as she took in the scattered seaweed, broken shells, and driftwood washed far higher than usual by the storm surge. Farther down the beach, near a bend where the dunes sloped low and the surf pushed in heavy, irregular pulses, something large disrupted the clean curve of the shoreline, a pale, unmoving shape half buried in swirling foam that caught Melissa's eye long before she understood what she was seeing. As she walked closer, the sheer size of the object became clear. A massive 14-foot great white shark lying on its side, its body angled toward the water with waves lapping repeatedly against its gills, each surge pushing sand around its jaw as it struggled weakly in the receding tide. Melissa froze for a moment, startled by the sight. Still, the creature's stillness and the strange vulnerability of such a powerful animal washed ashore made her curiosity eclipse her caution, and she moved slowly into the shallows, convinced the shark must have been dead or dying after the storm's violent push. The morning light glinted off the shark's dorsal fin, which rose like a dark blade above the pale gray body, and the contrast between its size and its helpless posture deepened her fascination as she approached. She stepped carefully around the churning water, her feet sinking into soft sand with each small wave, and the hypnotic pull of seeing such a legendary predator up close made her believe she could safely touch it without consequence. The shark's eye, partially obscured by grit and foam, appeared dull and lifeless, and its gills fluttered only faintly. So she reached out with her right hand, extending her fingers toward the dorsal fin in a tentative, almost gentle motion, imagining the strange feel of its rough texture beneath her palm. The instant her hand brushed the fin, the great white reacted with explosive force, revealing that it was far from incapacitated. Its entire body convulsed in a violent surge of instinctive survival, the tail whipping forward with shocking speed as the shark fought against the crushing pressure of the sand and surf, sending a blast of water and debris spraying into the air. Before Melissa could recoil, the shark twisted just enough to bring its jaws toward the source of contact, and with a rapid, reflexive snap, it clamped down on the side of her wrist, its teeth slicing deep into her forearm in a jagged, tearing grip that ripped through skin, muscle, and tendons in a single, devastating motion. The pain hit her like a bolt, so sharp and sudden that she stumbled backward into the foaming churn, collapsing onto her side as the shark thrashed again, sending a wave of sand, seaweed, and broken shells swirling up around her. Her blood mixed instantly with the swirling water, turning the foam a faint drifting red as she pushed herself desperately away from the violent movement, her injured arm trembling uncontrollably under the steady pulse of pain that radiated toward her shoulder. The shark continued to heave, driven by instinct and confusion, its body twisting in powerful arcs as each wave surged higher over its gills, and Melissa crawled backward through the shallow surf, frightened by how quickly the situation had turned from curiosity to life-threatening danger. Far up the beach, two lifeguards on morning patrol, Bryce Callahan and Jenna Ruiz, had spotted her earlier and noticed the disturbance now unfolding near the waterline. They sprinted toward her with flotation devices and long fiberglass poles designed for marine rescues. As they ran, Melissa struggled to stay conscious, struggling against the dizziness triggered by shock and blood loss, while the shark's thrashing continued inches from where her legs had scraped through the sand. Bryce reached her first, throwing a buoy between her and the shark to create space while pulling her upright with one arm, and Jenna positioned herself on the other side, using the pole to keep the shark from swinging toward them again as another surge of waves washed over its body. Working together, they dragged Melissa up the slope of the beach, away from the reach of the powerful tail that still lashed the water in unpredictable bursts. Once she was clear of the surf, Melissa collapsed onto the wet sand, clutching her mutilated arm as blood streamed from the deep punctures and jagged lacerations carved across her wrist and forearm, the injury severe enough to expose torn tendons and leave her hand trembling with fading strength. Bryce applied pressure with towels from his emergency pack. At the same time, Jenna radioed for medical evacuation. She kept her eyes fixed on the surf, where the shark continued to struggle with waves that briefly lifted its torso before gravity forced it back into the sand. Paramedics arrived minutes later, stabilizing Melissa and rushing her toward the nearest trauma center. At the same time, wildlife officials were notified to handle the distressed shark, which continued to fight the tide with diminishing force. In the aftermath, marine experts explained that stranded great whites often retain full reflex strength even when disoriented or partially suffocated by sand and shallow surf, and they emphasized that human curiosity can turn catastrophic when people approach apex predators that appear helpless but remain capable of explosive defensive movement. Melissa survived, but she faced months of reconstructive treatment, nerve repair, and rehabilitation after the attack on August 11, 2019, carrying with her the sobering reminder that even a single moment of curiosity can intersect disastrously with the raw instinct and power of one of the ocean's most formidable hunters. It was May 22, 2023, and the Ningaloo Reef shimmered in soft turquoise bands stretching toward the horizon, where shallow water filtered sunlight across bright coral heads and long ribbons of sand, creating a peaceful scene that drew tourists from around the world, none of whom expected the stillness to shatter with such sudden violence. Emma Lawson, 27, had arrived early that morning with a small snorkeling group, hoping to spend several quiet hours exploring the vibrant reef system she had dreamed of visiting for years. She felt a sense of contentment as she adjusted her mask and slipped into the warm Australian water, letting herself drift over swaying coral gardens. At the same time, schools of fish darted in flashes of blue, yellow, and silver beneath her. A few boats floated nearby, anchored just beyond a shallow sandbank, and the scattered tourists aboard watched snorkelers drift across the reef in slow, relaxed movements as guides pointed out rays resting in pockets of white sand and turtles gliding peacefully between coral bommies. The water was so clear that Emma could see 15 meters ahead with ease, giving her a sense of safety, even though she knew that Ningaloo, like any reef system, pulsed with the constant movement of marine predators beneath its calm surface. She filled her camera with photographs, kicking gently as she drifted over a patch of branching coral that towered upward like a small underwater forest, unaware that fish dislodged by several snorkelers' fins were scattering in panicked bursts across the sand channel behind her. Farther out in slightly deeper water, a 14-foot tiger shark patrolled the edge of the reef with the slow, deliberate confidence typical of its species. following scent trails and subtle pressure vibrations created by fish attempting to escape the sudden commotion above. Tiger sharks often move through this region in late autumn, when changing currents brought increased prey activity. On this day, the scattered movements from snorkelers were enough to draw the predator toward the sandbank, where the mix of shadows, uneven coral formations, and small darting fish triggered its instinctive interest. The shark's broad head angled upward as it passed beneath the reef, scanning for irregular movement, and its steady path carried it directly beneath the section where Emma floated, unaware and absorbed in framing another photograph. The moment of attack happened with terrifying speed. As Emma drifted over the edge of the coral patch, the sudden silhouette of her body created a stark contrast in the filtered sunlight, and the mix of her gentle kicking motion and the panicked scattering of fish below aligned in a way that triggered the shark's predatory reflex. With a powerful surge of its tail, the tiger shark rose from below, breaking through a cloud of suspended sand as it accelerated upward in a direct vertical strike. In a single, devastating motion, its jaws clamped around her torso with crushing force, folding her body into its grip as it dragged her downward, sending a violent swirl of bubbles and red-tinged water bursting upward to the surface. The snorkelers nearest to her froze for a moment in shock, unable to comprehend the blur beneath them. Then the screams began, sharp, panicked cries that echoed across the reef as people kicked frantically toward the boats, thrashing in fear as the water beneath them erupted with the predator's brutal strength. Emma disappeared within seconds, pulled into the deeper channel as the shark thrashed in powerful rolling motions that sent clouds of sand spilling over the coral heads and breaking the smooth clarity of the morning. Guides shouted and slapped the water with fins and flotation devices, desperate to break the predator's hold. Still, the tiger shark continued its assault with overwhelming force, ignoring every attempt to disrupt it as it vanished into the deeper blue beyond the reef's edge. 2 rescue divers from one of the tour boats entered the water within moments, descending along the sand slope with deliberate, practiced movements. Still, visibility had collapsed into murky streaks of disturbed sediment, and the chaotic stillness that followed the attack left them searching through a maze of coral formations without any sign of Emma. They followed the widening cloud of silt into deeper water, scanning for movement or any trace of the shark's return path. Still, tiger sharks were known for swift, decisive attacks followed by rapid withdrawal into deeper, quieter channels. Within minutes, it became clear that the predator had retreated far beyond the reach of rescue efforts. On the surface, the boats pulled snorkelers aboard in panicked clusters, some sobbing, some shaking, all unable to fully understand how quickly the peaceful morning had collapsed into horror. Guides coordinated with authorities as they marked the approximate location of the attack. In contrast, others gathered Emma's floating gear, a camera drifting face down in the water, a single fin caught on a patch of coral, and her snorkel tube bobbing gently in the tide. The water gradually cleared, the sediment sinking back into the crevices of the reef, as if erasing the violent struggle that had taken place moments earlier, leaving only the calm surface and the muffled rumble of distant waves breaking along the outer reef. Search teams arrived within the hour, deploying drones, rescue divers, and boats to comb the surrounding channels. Still, the vastness of Ningaloo Reef and the tiger shark's unpredictable movement patterns made recovery efforts difficult, and by late afternoon the search shifted from rescue to retrieval. Despite extensive sweeps along the reef, Emma's body was never found, carried away either by currents or by the predator that had struck with such precision and force earlier in the day. Her belongings, recovered near the sandbank, were catalogued by authorities as the reef returned to its deceptively peaceful state beneath the fading light. In the days that followed, marine experts emphasized that tiger sharks, although often cautious around humans, become increasingly reactive in prey-rich shallow zones, where sudden movement can trigger instinctive strikes, especially when fish activity is heightened. Visibility is fractured by shifting light and sediment. Emma's tragic death on May 22, 2023, served as a stark reminder that even tranquil reef environments hold powerful risks, and that the ocean's most dangerous moments often emerge without warning in places that appear serene and safe from the surface. The drills began under a sky that appeared calm enough to make the Atlantic seem almost gentle, with the low morning light washing the surface in muted silver. The steady hum of the Coast Guard patrol boat drifted across the water as if the day promised nothing beyond routine practice, even though the sea around Cape Cod often concealed danger beneath its shifting currents. On August 26, 2024, a U.S. Coast Guard training team gathered several hundred yards off a seal-rich stretch of the Massachusetts coastline, preparing for another series of overwater rescue exercises that mirrored real emergencies, each drill designed to test reaction time, endurance, and precision. And the crew approached the session with the familiarity that came from countless similar mornings spent honing their skills. Petty Officer Jason Miller, 32, had completed these drills many times before. As he secured his fins and adjusted his vest, he felt the usual steady focus settle over him, the blend of discipline and confidence that came from years of working in unpredictable maritime conditions. The patrol boat rocked gently in the tide as the crew set the pale rescue dummy into the water, letting it drift several meters away while they positioned themselves for the time simulation. The surface rippled softly under Jason's strokes as he slipped into the chilly water, the cold pressing against his wetsuit. At the same time, he swam toward the dummy with long, efficient kicks, his movement sending small bursts of spray into the otherwise quiet morning. Further out, beyond the sandbars and the wide arcs of kelp drifting with the current, a 16-foot great white shark patrolled the deeper channel with slow, confident sweeps of its tail, tracking the presence of seals that clustered near the outer edges of the feeding grounds. Late summer always drew predators closer to Cape Cod's coastline, where the combination of prey concentration and increased human activity created a volatile overlap. On this particular morning, the scattered splashes from the Coast Guard training exercise joined the natural sounds that shaped the shark's hunting reflexes. Its attention shifted as Jason's rhythmic strokes disturbed the surface in a pattern similar to struggling prey, the vibrations carrying through the water in long, pulsing trails. As Jason neared the rescue dummy, the shark began its ascent from the darker water below, rising through cold layers of shifting green as it locked onto the source of motion with growing intensity, its wide head angling upward as it accelerated. Jason reached out to secure the dummy, gripping the arm to begin the towback toward the patrol boat. For a brief moment, he felt the familiar resistance of the training weight, unaware of the powerful shape climbing rapidly through the column beneath him. The attack came without warning, shattering the quiet in an explosion of force as the great white surged upward, breaking the surface in a burst of water and foam as its jaws clamped around Jason's torso with crushing power. The impact drove him downward in a shock of disorientation, cold and pain as the shark dragged him beneath the waves, its teeth tearing across his chest and arms in deep, ragged lacerations, while he fought instinctively to push upward toward the dim light above. The patrol boat jolted with sudden shouts as the crew saw the violent churn of water where Jason had vanished, and several members lunged for the poles and defensive tools stored along the gunwale, their movements frantic as they tried to pinpoint the shark's position in the frothing surface. Jason struggled to break free as the shark twisted, dragging him deeper into the darkening water with powerful rolling motions that knocked the breath from his lungs and sent sharp pain through his ribs. He felt a momentary release as the shark adjusted its grip, and he kicked desperately toward the faint brightness above, forcing himself toward the surface, even as blood clouded around him, drifting in long red ribbons through the water. When he burst through the surface, gasping for air, two crew members were already reaching out with extended poles, trying to haul him closer to the boat while others prepared flares to drive the shark back if it surged upward again. The great white resurfaced moments later in a violent strike that sent another wave crashing across Jason's body, knocking him sideways and nearly pulling him from the grasp of the rescuers. One crew member slammed a pole against the shark's snout with all the force he could muster, while another ignited a flare and thrust it toward the predator's face, setting off bright, crackling sparks that briefly disoriented the shark and forced it to veer away. Jason drifted between consciousness and shock as they maneuvered him closer to the ladder, his limbs failing to respond as his strength faded and blood loss darkened the edges of his vision. Working with urgent coordination, two crew members hooked their arms beneath his shoulders, hauling him up the ladder step by step, while another stabilized his legs and kept an eye on the dark shape circling just below the surface. Once Jason collapsed onto the deck, the severity of his injuries became fully visible. Wide lacerations carved across his chest and arms, deep punctures along his ribs, torn muscle tissue, and bruising already spreading beneath the shredded sections of his wetsuit. Several ribs had snapped under the shark's bite, complicating his breathing as the crew worked quickly to apply pressure bandages and keep him alert while radioing for immediate medical evacuation. The patrol boat sped toward shore, bouncing over the chop as the crew fought to slow Jason's bleeding and prevent him from slipping into unconsciousness. At the same time, behind them, the shark circled once more before descending back into the deep channel, resuming its predatory path along the reef. Jason remained conscious long enough to reach the waiting paramedics at the harbor, where he was transferred into an ambulance and rushed toward a trauma center that had been alerted to prepare for massive blood loss, complex lacerations, and internal injuries. Over the following days, specialists emphasized that even the most experienced Coast Guard personnel faced exceptional risk when conducting in-water exercises near active seal colonies, explaining that apex predators like great whites were instinctively drawn to patterns of movement and sounds that mimicked prey in distress. The storm had come out of nowhere, rising fast over the Caribbean and swallowing the cruise ship in sheets of rain before anyone could react, turning the deck into a slick, unpredictable surface where even the most ordinary movements carried hidden danger. Melissa Carter, 31, had stepped out only to secure her camera, unaware that the worsening winds and the sudden listing of the vessel were aligning into a moment that would pull her violently away from safety, leaving no time to prepare for what waited in the turbulent water below. On September 11, 2016, the ship drifted along a reef-fringed channel east of the Bahamas, where the ocean had already darkened under thickening storm clouds. Heavy gusts tore at awnings and sent chairs skidding across the empty deck. Crew members on rotation moved quickly between stations, tightening lines and checking railings as lightning flickered across the distant horizon. Melissa, caught between wanting one last photograph of the storm front and wanting to return indoors before the rain intensified, braced herself against the railing while the ship pitched hard to port. The combined force of wind, water, and sudden motion ripped her balance away. Without a sound beyond a sharp gasp swallowed by the storm, she toppled over the slick railing and dropped into the violent sea. The water consumed her instantly, spinning her sideways as the storm's energy twisted the surface into chaotic peaks and troughs. Rain hammered the waves so hard it felt like gravel against her skin. Melissa tried to orient herself, fighting the drag of her clothes and the shock of the cold. Above her, alarms sounded as crew and passengers rushed to the rail, pointing frantically through the sheets of rain. A life ring arced through the air but landed too far, swept away before she could reach it. The ship, struggling against the shifting wind, drifted along the edge of a shallow reef system known for dense schools of baitfish. Under normal conditions, the area was quiet and scenic, a place for snorkeling excursions and wildlife tours. But storms pushed prey species toward the reef, concentrating them into tight clusters that clouded the water below Melissa. Predators followed. The churning motion of the squall, mixed with the foam, shadows, and frantic splashes made by a fallen human, created a pattern that few reef sharks could ignore. Melissa kicked hard toward the floating debris, bits of plastic, a stray piece of rope, fragments of the ship's coverings, hoping something would buoy her. Her hands slapped against the water in wide arcs, desperate movements that sent vibrations spreading through the murk below. The ocean felt suddenly alive around her, shifting in unnatural ways. She sensed the presence before she saw it, a dark shape slicing through the rain-streaked surface. A 9-foot Caribbean reef shark rose from the gloom, drawn by the commotion and the dense prey stirred up by the storm. It didn't charge with full intent, but with the investigative burst typical of sharks in turbulent conditions. The animal lunged from below, its snout cutting upward as it grazed her calf. Its teeth raked across her leg in a long, tearing line that sent blood fanning through the water. The impact knocked her sideways, plunging her beneath a cresting wave that folded over her like a heavy curtain. When Melissa surfaced again, gasping through the spray, the water around her had shifted. The shark turned tightly, circling with sudden interest, now that the scent of blood mingled with the churning foam. The storm magnified everything: sound, vibration, pressure changes, pulling the animal closer as it assessed the source. Every kick Melissa made drew the shark a little tighter into its loop. Crew members leaned over the railing with poles, ropes, and flotation devices. One sailor, drenched and bracing his boots against the slick deck, swung a long pole toward her position, trying to break the shark's line without striking Melissa. Another crewman prepared a flare, but the whipping wind risked blowing burning fragments back toward the deck. The ship's engines roared as the captain attempted to hold position against the storm long enough for the rescue attempt to work. A second shark appeared, smaller but moving with quicker, sharper motions. It circled from the opposite side, its dorsal fin slicing briefly through the surface before dipping under again. Melissa felt the water pulse around her as both sharks traced the vibrations of her kicks, her heartbeat, the shifting pressure of her attempts to stay afloat. She tried to pull her injured leg upward, but the storm churned relentlessly, pushing her down each time she lifted her head. The crew threw another life ring, this one landing close enough for her to reach. Melissa stretched out, fingers brushing the foam surface just as a powerful surge lifted her on a crest. She grabbed the ring with both hands, locking her elbows around it as her injured leg trailed behind, bleeding steadily into the turbulent sea. The sharks tightened their patterns, each pass bringing them closer, the water around her legs shuddering with the force of their movement. 2 crew members lowered a long hook pole and began dragging the ring toward the hull. Melissa clung to it as another wave slammed her against the pull, nearly ripping her grip free. The larger shark made one more upward sweep, snapping at the water near her trailing leg but missing as the crew hauled her closer to the ship's steel side. Another wave lifted her just high enough for 2 sailors to lean out and seize her arms, dragging her onto the lower rescue platform. She collapsed onto the metal grate as blood streamed across the surface and mixed with rainwater. Her calf bore deep punctures, torn muscle, and long, jagged slashes where the teeth had glanced across the bone. The storm winds howled around the rescue crew as they wrapped her leg, secured her to a stretcher, and carried her into the interior of the vessel, where the medic team stabilized her. Melissa Carter survived the ordeal, but experts later emphasized that the convergence of weather, reef conditions, baitfish activity, and human vulnerability created a scenario in which even a brief fall from a large vessel could escalate into a dangerous shark encounter. They noted that Caribbean reef sharks, while not typically aggressive toward humans, can become unpredictable in storm-churned waters heavy with prey signals, a combination that turned a single misstep on a rain-slicked deck into a life-threatening event.